Hi, this is Dave, and before we get to the show, I wanted to ask you a favor. One of our goals this year is to grow the show so that What Does Star Wars Mean to You reaches more listeners. And that's where we're asking you for help. And it's really easy. Wherever you listen to us, please hit that subscribe button. If you're liking the show, give us a 5-star rating and review on the platform you listen to us. We make a lot of fun of the algorithm and the smash that button thing, but it really does help us get noticed by new fans. And if you want to join in on the conversation, find us on social at Star Wars Mean to You. That's Star Wars Mean, the number 2 in the letter U. Now, let's chat some Star Wars. Hello there. This is Dave, and you're listening to What Does Star Wars Mean to You, the show where we talk to all kinds of fans of Star Wars, from industry insiders to indie artists, from mega collectors to obsessive mythologists, to find out how Star Wars impacted their life. Here's the thing, there's a lot of ways to look at Star Wars, and it's all from a certain point of view. And that point of view is yours. And let's face it, we all love what we all love about Star Wars. And I believe that listening to someone talk passionately about what they love can open your mind to new points of views. Also, it's just fun to talk Star Wars. So I want to change the conversation from what is right or wrong about Star Wars to what does Star Wars mean to you? Today it's episode 17 and my conversation with director-writer Thunder Levin. He wrote the SYFY original movies Sharknado 1, 2, 3, and Sharknado The 4th Awakens. Now, of all the SYFY originals that want to have grade A attitude with B movie plots, the Sharknado movies are the great whites of them all. At least in my opinion. But before that, let's talk about the big news this week. Disney has set dates for 3 Star Wars movies: May 2026, December 2026, and December 2027. And that's like 3 and 4 years from now. Here's the thing, I'm going to be honest, those dates are so far away that I can't even comprehend them. It's so far away that someone could graduate college, get married, and have their first child before May 2026. That's a lot that could happen. I wasn't even sure I was going to talk about the movies because they're so far away. But then it feels awkward to have a Star Wars show and not talk about the latest news. Yes, I just giggled at my own far away joke. But they might as well have said sometime in the future something is going to happen. Part of it, I'm just tired of being teased in marketing with things. Here's the rollout. Here's everything that's coming. Well, as of now, 3 years? 4 years? Come on. All I'm saying is hit me up when you have a trailer. When there's images with completed effects cut together to tell a story, then I'll get excited to be excited about it. I think part of it is I'm just tired of the marketing machine constantly teasing me with premiere dates. It's 3 years away. 4 years. Come on. All I'm saying is hit me up when you have a trailer. When there's images with completed effects cut together to tell a story, then I'll get excited to be excited about it. And here's the other thing. Why get excited about something that might happen? Might not happen? I mean, how many movies have they announced and then taken away? Like Rian Johnson has 3. Now I could get excited for that, or I can spend my time getting excited for what's going to happen. And right now, the one with a trailer and a premiere date and a title is Ahsoka. And I'm getting excited about it. And as my excitement builds, I think back on Rebels and how damn good it was, which then makes me excited to do a Rebels rewatch as a countdown to Ahsoka. Maybe even break it down a little bit on here. What do you think? What do you think of the movie release dates? When do you get hyped for a movie or show? And do you want to talk Rebels as we count down to Ahsoka? Let me know in Twitter or Instagram at Star Wars Mean to You. That's at Star Wars Mean, the number 2 and the letter U. Now, moving on for context, this conversation was recorded in late March. I was getting over a bad cold, so you may hear some stray coughing. And this is before the start of the writer's strike, and I certainly hope the writers get the piece of the pie they've earned. If you don't want to miss guests like this, hit the subscribe button. If you're liking the show, please give a 5-star rating and review. Now, let's find out, what does Star Wars mean to Thunder Levin? Today, my guest is a director and a screenwriter. He's best known for writing the first 4 Sharknado movies for Asylum Films and the SYFY network. The 4th movie, which came out in 2016, was called Sharknado: The 4th Awakens. Sound familiar? He credits seeing Star Trek as a child to opening his mind to the wonders of science fiction and seeing Star Wars as solidifying his desire to make movies when he grew up. Let's give a warm hello there to Thunder Levin.
Hello there.
My first question to you, Thunder.
Yes.
Are you ready to tell the world what does Star Wars mean to you?
I am ready to tell the world what Star Wars means to me. I am.
Excellent. So I like to start with a thing called 5 with the Force. This is just 5 basic questions I ask all my guests to kind of get a baseline of where their faves of Star Wars are. My first question is, which Star Wars movie is your go-to favorite?
The Empire Strikes Back.
That's seems to be a popular choice.
Well, it was the best of them. So
yeah,
anyone who doesn't choose it is mistaken.
For question 2, I have to roll 1d6, and let's see what I got. A 3. Who is your favorite bounty hunter?
Oh, pretty much anyone except Boba Fett. Maybe the one who briefly appeared in one of the prequels, the tall, bald woman. What was her name?
Oh, yeah.
Aurora Singh or something.
Yeah, Aurora Singh, I think
something like that. Yeah. I don't know anything about her, but she looked cool.
Yes.
So that's, I'm not, honestly, I don't know the names of any bounty hunters except her and Boba Fett. So I was just reaching for the only other name I had.
Why not Boba Fett?
You know, I never understood the fascination with Boba Fett. I mean, maybe because I blocked out the holiday special and I didn't read, the comic books or anything. So when Boba Fett appeared, he was just some guy in a helmet that I didn't know anything about. And I continued to not know anything about him throughout the original trilogy. And so why would I care? I just never understood why people were so fascinated with him. So when they made a series about him, the only 2 episodes I really enjoyed were the 2 that had Luke Skywalker in them and not Boba Fett. So.
The Mandalorian episodes that were inserted.
Why weren't those the first 2 episodes of the new season of Mandalorian? It would have made the 3rd season so much better if that's how it had started.
I don't know. I wonder it myself. It almost feels like they took a Mandalorian movie of the week. And I don't mean that derisively. I just mean that that's what it was. It was a kind of a 2-hour movie or whatever hour. And just put it in the middle of Boba Fett without much reason. It was
very strange.
What is your favorite line to quote?
Well, there's a line I use whenever we're talking about movies. It's all a lot of simple tricks and nonsense. That's my movie making philosophy.
It's also very true in movies.
Yes, it is.
Or movie making.
Yes. I mean, Yoda's whole speech from Empire Strikes Back is pretty good. Size matters not. Judge me by my size, do you? And well, you should not. For my ally is the Force, and a powerful ally it is.
Can you do any Star Wars impressions or impersonations?
No, I can't. I can try and do a little Yoda, but it's not very good. There was one I actually just put a line of his into a script. Told you I did. Reckless is he. That's the best you're gonna get from me, I'm afraid. I stay behind the camera for a reason.
Besides the movies, what is your favorite Star Wars content? This could be a TV show, comic book, video game, toys, novel, or it could be a movie too.
Well, I love Mara Jade, although now she doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I'm hoping they'll figure out a way to make her exist. Luke Skywalker's entrance in the season 2, episode 10 of Mandalorian was pretty awesome. I wish they had used John Williams' Force theme throughout.
Yes.
I feel like the music kind of robbed that scene of some of its power. That's I don't know. I'd have to give that more thought. But off the top of my head, that's where I'm going.
Now, when I talk to people, I usually keep my focus on Star Wars. and what they do for a living is kind of incidental, but I kind of have to ask you because I mentioned it in the open with Sharknado for the Fourth Awakens. Did you come up with that title? Was that a brainstorm from a group of people? What's the story?
We were all throwing titles into the hat, and the SYFY, I believe the SYFY marketing department came up with that.
Wow.
So I can't take credit for it. I wish I could, because we were already leaning into Star Wars. So
Yep.
when they came in with that, I was like, yeah, that's perfect. We're done.
That must have been very like thrilling, maybe too big of a word, exciting for you that to put a Star Wars mark on your movie.
Yeah, yeah, and unfortunately, it's my least favorite of the four Sharknadoes. Um, but it was great to be able to do that, and I had a lot of fun with that. Well, I had an idea for a teaser trailer slash commercial that I got everyone very excited about, and then for various reasons we couldn't do it. But it was going to be the first thing that anybody would see about Sharknado 4. You know, it would come out like 6 months ahead of time. And it would start out on these feet walking up Vasquez Rocks, you know, the
Uh-huh.
famous rock formation outside LA where Star
Yeah.
Trek shot a lot. And it would just be this woman's feet climbing up. And what it was going to be was and we would gradually reveal more and more of her as she climbed until we realized it was Nova. Um, she'd have her shotgun and she'd have a bag slung over her shoulder, just like Rey at the end of Force Awakens. And gradually she would get to the top. And most people, most people watching sci-fi might not recognize Cassie Skirbo. So we thought it would work, and she would stay relatively anonymous until she got to the very top of Vasquez Rocks. And then we would pan over and we would see this guy with his back to us and a hood up. He would turn around and it would be Finn, and he would pull his hoodie back, and Nova would reach into her bag and pull out a chainsaw and hold it out to him, and then you'd get the graphic Sharknado: The Fourth Awakens.
Wait.
And I was so excited about this, and I pitched it to Anthony Ferrante, the director, and he loved it. And we pitched it to the guys at the Asylum, and they loved it. And then for scheduling reasons, Cassie Skirbo wasn't in the movie. And so we couldn't do it. And it just broke my heart because it would have been so good. And until Ian Ziering turned around, you wouldn't have known what the fuck it was about.
Yeah.
And that it still bugs me that we never got to do that.
That sounds great. That would be and fantastic timing for it too. Like
Yeah.
before Last Jedi comes out.
Oh yeah. Back when Star Wars, hadn't
Yeah.
been whatever.
Divided.
Divided. Okay, good word.
Let's go back. Now I feel like a therapist. Let's go back to your childhood.
Okay.
I'm assuming Star Wars: A New Hope was the first film you saw. Could you take me back to what it was like seeing it for the first time? Do you remember?
I do. I remember the day vividly. I almost feel like I want to go back further because, as you said in your introduction, it all started with Star Trek when I was a very little kid. One of my very first memories is watching the moon landing, Apollo 11. At about the same time, Star Trek was like the only grown-up show that I watched. And my mom let me stay up late to watch it, actually. And I wanted to be Mr. Spock or Captain Kirk when I grew up. I wanted to work on the Enterprise. But I understood that it wasn't real because at the same time I was watching the Apollo mission, and that was hopelessly crude. I didn't want any part of that.
Yeah.
And so it kind of bummed me out as a little kid that I couldn't actually do this when I grew up. And then somebody gave me a book called The Making of Star Trek. And it was a grown-up book, and it was way too dry for me at the age. And so naturally I turned to the photo section. And in that photo section of this book, there's a picture of these studio technicians in their 1960s attire working on the bridge of the Enterprise on Sulu and Chekhov's helm set. And it suddenly occurred to me that there was a way I could grow up to work on the Enterprise. And so that was the first seed of maybe TV and movies being a career. but nobody in my family really, had any connection to that. So it was kind of a far-fetched thing. And as I grew up, kids get distracted and we want to do all sorts of things. And eventually I wanted to play for the Yankees and what have you. And so that idea kind of drifted away until May of 1977. And mind you, I was a serious science fiction fan. I read Asimov and Clarke and Heinlein. I didn't read comic books. That was beneath me. I was very much about serious, thoughtful science fiction, and I was a big Trekker. And all I was waiting for was for Star Trek to come back. And looking at it now as an adult, the what was it, 10 years between the end of the original series and the first Star Trek movie, would have been an eye blink for me today. But back then, as a kid, Star Trek was already off the air when I started watching it. It was in, syndication, and it seemed like it was never going to come back. So it was sort of this forlorn hope. So then in May of 1977, I started seeing these commercials for Star Wars, and it just looked so dumb. I mean, it was like a Western in outer space, and there was a giant teddy bear, and these ships were doing things that spaceships couldn't do. They were making noise and they were making bank turns, and it just looked ridiculous. And so I didn't go see it when it opened. And then one day I was in a bookstore, a science fiction bookstore, and I was just looking through some stuff they had out. And there was a program, in those days, and maybe still every once in a while, there'll be a program that's distributed to the audience on opening day of a movie. And there was this program for Star Wars, and I started looking through it. And I started reading about the rebellion and all this stuff. And it actually kind of piqued my interest. And I started to think, maybe this won't be so bad. Maybe I should go see it. And so a bunch of my friends and I, on the last day of school in June of 77, we walked down to this great movie theater that was about 10 blocks from our school, called the Lowe's Orpheum on East 86th Street in New York. And it's like this giant old movie palace, like 1,400 seats, I think, and a huge screen. And we went down. It was a hot afternoon. In the middle of the day, the theater, they were still selling out on the weekends and in the evenings. The lines were still around the block. But on this particular weekday afternoon, there wasn't really a line to get in. And in fact, I remember the theater being relatively empty for a 1,400 seat theater. So there were probably a few hundred people in there, which in a multiplex today would be sold out. But in this giant theater, it wasn't that big an audience. And I remember it was very cold. It's like they really had the air conditioning cranked up. And I remember sitting there in the dark. I've never had such a vivid memory of a movie-going experience. And I remember there must have been trailers, but I don't remember them at all. And I remember how dark it was. And I remember the Fox logo coming on and seeing this thing that I had only ever seen on TV with very tinny sound. And in fact, at that point, I think we didn't even have a color TV. So it was something I'd only seen in black and white, maybe on a 19-inch TV screen with tinny monaural sound. And then there was the second half of it. Because when it was on TV with movies and stuff, you usually only got the first half of the Fox fanfare. But then there's that whole second half that back in the 50s or whenever it was done would be only played with CinemaScope movies, right? So the movie screen would open to the normal width. I'm doing hand gestures, which the audience can't see. But the movie screen would open to a certain width for a standard aspect ratio movie. And then it would keep opening to a wider width for the CinemaScope film. And that's when the second half of the Fox fanfare played. And so I don't know that I'd ever even seen or heard that before. And so that already I was excited by. And then, of course, it goes quiet and you get a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And then when that first note of the Star Wars fanfare hit, it was like a physical force throwing me back in my seat. It was like I could feel it passing through me. And I'd never felt anything like that before. And mind you, this was a 6-channel Dolby theater. So, and it was one of the premier theaters in New York City with the best sound system, 70 millimeter 6-track Dolby, which I believe that was the first movie that had ever had that. And if it wasn't, it was certainly the first movie I'd ever seen that had it. And the other thing I forgot to tell you that I should have started off with is this was the first time I'd ever gone to a movie without my parents or some other adult supervision. So the whole thing was kind of an exciting adventure to begin with. So I was already primed for something. And then that music, and then the Star Wars graphic flying away, that was like nothing I'd ever seen before. And then the scroll was like nothing I'd ever seen before. And then you get a chance to catch your breath. And then what the fuck happens? This spaceship flies over our head. The whole theater is vibrating, and it just fucking keeps going. And it goes and it goes. And you can't believe how big this spaceship is. And I had never seen anything like that before. And by that point, all my preconceptions about how dumb this was going to be and how silly were just blown out the window. And from then on, I was just utterly enthralled. And the idea of space being old and worn down was also something we'd never seen in science fiction at that point. No, I think Star Wars was the very first time that science fiction and spaceships weren't clean and sleek and futuristic. So the whole thing just blew my mind. And the thing that really got me, and I don't know why this was the thing that really got me. When the first Bantha comes walking on screen, I suddenly thought to myself, "Oh my God, they dressed up an elephant." That just struck me as the most amazing thing for somebody to do.
Like fully costumed
an elephant. And that moment, I think, was when I thought, I'm going to make movies. This is the most awesome thing I've ever seen, and I've got to do this. And I just walked out of that theater completely blown away. It was like I walked out of the theater into a totally different world. And the interesting thing was that all the press around Star Wars, George Lucas was as much a part of the whole press push as Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, and Carrie Fisher. And I had never had any awareness of filmmakers. I mean, I knew who Gene Roddenberry was. I knew he was important. But he was a producer. He sat in an office and he thought up shit. He didn't actually make Star Trek, you know? And the idea of this guy who not only thought it up, but made it and chose the costumes and chose where people walked and how they looked and that was the first time I was really aware of the idea of a director. And so over that summer, I saw the movie 12 times in the theater.
Wow.
And I decided that I was going to be a film director.
Now, you were into hard sci-fi. Yeah. And then saw this, what I call a fantasy film. I think Star Wars is
science
fantasy.
Fiction. Yeah.
Now, you see Star Wars in 77 and it blows your mind. But as a fan of Star Trek, when that movie came out in 78 or 79,
December 6th or 7th of 79, I was the 6th person online for the very first showing. It was freezing cold because it was December.
Yeah. And
the first 5 or 6 people had camped out overnight in their sleeping bags. I thought they were insane when I got there at 6 a.m. And of course, the whole theater filled up behind me, and those people probably thought I was insane. But I was.
But at least you didn't sleep out in the cold.
Right. I was determined to see the very first public showing of Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
How did that showing of Star Trek: The Motion Picture hold up to what your feeling of Star Wars was? Like, did your love of Star Trek kind of care? Because that's a notoriously slow, thoughtful movie. And I
don't know how even thoughtful it was. It was just slow. If there had been more thought in the slowness, it might have been better. No, I was very disappointed with Star Trek: The Motion Picture. That was not my Star Trek. That was not my Kirk and Spock and McCoy. I mean, it was almost McCoy, but it certainly wasn't Kirk and Spock. So it was very disappointing, especially after what Star Wars showed was possible. Now, mind you, the 5 minutes flying over the Enterprise in the shuttle pod remains to this day my favorite 5 minutes of cinema ever made. I could have done that for the whole 2 hours and been happy. But other than that, I found that movie very disappointing.
Cinema Craptaculous is your podcast destination for all things movies, good and bad, streaming series, good and bad, and pop culture, good, bad, and the ugly. You get a totally different show every week, such as People Also Watched with Adam, Dave, and Tara. They're three industry insiders who always find the hilarity in the big budget feature and the lesser known feature you may have missed. There is, of course, the expanded universe. This is your place to geek out. John, Doc, and S'more are your geek experts to talk about what's going on in the world of streaming series, movies, superheroes, pretty much any showbiz geek topic, they're going to talk about it. And, of course, there's the show that started it all, Cinema Craptaculous, with Stephanie, John, and Dave. You don't even need to have seen the movies these guys talk about to have a good time. So what are you waiting for? Go and subscribe to Cinema Craptaculous wherever you listen to your favorite podcast.
Well, let's talk about Return of the Jedi before I ask. What was your reaction to that? Because now you're 6 years older. You're probably in your mid-20s.
No, I think I was 19 or 20.
Which is a transitional state.
Yeah, it was definitely a transitional time. I mean, I was already in film school, but of course it was summer. So I guess it must have been summer before junior year, I think. So I was already in film school. Anyhow, I'm sorry.
That's
repeat
okay.
your question.
In that transitional period of growing up, it's a time when, especially in the 80s, where people were shedding their youth and moving on to adulthood. What was your reaction to Return of the Jedi? Did you fall in love with it? Were you lukewarm? Was it like was Star Trek the motion picture?
It was not quite Star Trek the motion picture. When I walked out of Star Trek the motion picture, I knew I was disappointed. When I walked out of Return of the Jedi, I wasn't sure. And I remember feeling very ambivalent and unsettled on the whole subway ride home, really thinking about, I mean, it was very exciting, and it ended the way you wanted it to end. And Luke was a Jedi and it had a great lightsaber battle.
Yeah.
But what was with the fucking teddy bears? If Return of the Jedi had been a sequel to Star Wars, it would have been less disappointing. But having already risen to the seriousness of Empire Strikes Back, it felt like Return of the Jedi was a step backwards. The effects were obviously much better. Obviously, they made huge strides with each of those three movies.
Return of the Jedi being the last of the films and seemingly to be the end of the Star Wars world or era.
Yeah.
Was there anything that kept you in touch with Star Wars between 83 and 99?
Yeah. I mean, I got into the Star Wars fandom as much as I was in the Star Trek fandom, I think. I never really understood the conflict between the two fandom groups.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I followed along, when the books started coming out, I read them.
These are the Timothy Zahn Heir to the Empire.
Timothy Zahn, yeah. Because I was already in film school and I was already planning to be a filmmaker, I followed whenever something about Star Wars would bubble up because there had been Lucas had always said that there were going to be 6 or 9 or 12, depending on which interview it was. But there was always supposed to be more. Episode 1 was always looming out there. It was just a matter of when was he going to get around to it. And then, everybody knew his divorce kind of screwed him up and screwed up the timeline, if you will. But it was always out there. It was always going to happen someday. So that continued. And I remember my senior year, I had a friend who was a year ahead of me at NYU, and he was already out in LA while I was still in New York. And he told me that he had heard a rumor that Lucas had a meeting at Fox with Irvin Kershner, and that maybe episode 1 was going to be getting started. And it turned out either that was a false rumor or nothing ever came of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there was always stuff like that, and I'd already gone to some Star Trek conventions. So I was into all that, and there was no internet back then, but I tried to stay as abreast of things as I could.
Yeah. Starlog magazine.
Yeah, Starlog magazine, Cinefex, American Cinematographer. I was certainly keeping up with everything ILM did. and keeping up with ILM's work for other movies, and for
Yeah.
Willow, and for Indiana Jones, and everything else. Star Wars never really went away. It was just resting, and it was going to come back someday. We all sort of proceeded with that knowledge, and it was just a matter of when, and waiting for it. And we waited longer than we expected to.
Yeah. Well, your first movie experience with Star Wars sounds really amazing. Sounds like the perfect way to experience it for the first time, honestly.
Yes. And I honestly, I feel bad for people who didn't get to experience it that way. And the fact that the fandom has been so strong, despite the fact that most of the fans today saw Star Wars for the first time probably on VHS or DVD, but on a relatively small TV, is just a testament to how great it is.
When the re-releases, the special editions came out, did you feel a build-up towards seeing those in the theater again?
Yeah, that was great. We went to see all those. And some of the changes were great. Some of them were annoying. But yeah, it was fun to see it on the big screen again for the first time. And it was obviously designed to reignite the fandom for episode 1. That first trailer for the special editions, where it starts off on the little screen and then the X-Wing blows out of the frame. That was great.
I talked to Trey Calloway a couple weeks ago, and he's the one. I didn't know this when I talked to him, but he's the one who did those trailers. He was like, "Yeah, I worked on the trailers for the re-release," and I was like, "Wait, what?"
Yeah, I actually had this plan when I was finishing up film school about how my career would proceed, and it all involved directing episode 2 or 3. I assumed Lucas would direct episode 1 and then follow the pattern of the original trilogy and hire other directors for 2 and 3. And I was determined that directing episode 2 or 3 would be my second feature after I'd made a feature that brought me to Lucas's attention. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way, but that was the plan.
It's a good plan. I was determined to be Anakin.
Okay. Well, you understand that means becoming the most evil man in the galaxy eventually.
I do. But
okay, well, that tells me a lot about
you. You get to be a good guy.
Okay.
Well, kind of.
But do you? Because we all knew he was going to be a bad guy. So I was always, I spent the whole, first 2 2/3 of the prequels, looking for the signs. How does this cute little kid become the most evil man in the galaxy?
Did you think that was a good entry point to the storyline of starting him out as an 8-year-old and seeing that he's just this innocent child and going up to
At the time I didn't. At the time I didn't, but in retrospect it makes sense, yeah. Because if you just started when he was a teenager, teenagers can be assholes to begin with. So yeah, it made sense to see him as the innocent kid first.
Has your view of the prequels, I mean, we talked a little bit about how that choice of starting him out as an 8-year-old and moving on, your viewpoint has changed. Has more of your viewpoint of the prequels changed since seeing them in the theaters?
No, I find the prequels as disappointing now as I did then. And every once in a while I go back, if they happen to be on TV and I'm channel surfing, I'll watch for a little bit thinking, maybe I should give them another chance. And then they're always as bad as I remember. And I have friends who will insist to this day that Revenge of the Sith is actually a good movie. And I go back and I try and watch and I'm like, no, it's not. It's just not. It's a good lightsaber battle. But that's the best I can say about it.
I think Revenge of the Sith is a good movie in comparison to the Star Wars echelon. But when you're trying to compare it to other things, even Star Trek 4 or Blade Runner, it's not going to hold up.
Yeah. Now, Revenge of the Sith for me, I guess it's number 5.
Yeah.
I mean, it goes Empire, Star Wars, Force Awakens, Return of the Jedi, and then Revenge of the Sith. And Force Awakens, that's judging it for itself, right?
Yes.
If I hadn't seen the original movie and I'm just watching Force Awakens for itself, it's a terrific movie. When you accept the fact that it's basically a remake of the original, that should knock a point off. But at the same time, I go back and watch Return of the Jedi, and it seems like they thought they were making a slapstick movie. Watching it now, Jedi, my opinion of Jedi has gone down over the years, whereas my opinion of the prequels is exactly the same as it was the first time I saw them.
Well, what about your reaction to the sequel trilogy? And not so much the trilogy as a whole, but let's talk about the build-up to The Force Awakens. Were you...
Yeah, there's something I didn't tell you about the prequels, though, about Episode 1.
Yeah, please.
I was one of the crazy people who camped out in line for 6 weeks for the first showing of Episode 1. Yeah.
Oh my God.
I wasn't there for 6 weeks. We did it in shifts. We had a group of like 100 people, but I was part of one of those campouts. So that made Episode 1 all the more disappointing because we'd been building up to it so much.
That is a huge build-up. And what was that experience like? Because you're basically a community of 100, saving your place in line for each other.
Yeah.
This is on Hollywood Boulevard in front of the Pantages?
No, I didn't. That was the Chinese theater. No, I didn't go to that one. I was my favorite theater now is in Westwood. It's the Village Theater in Westwood, and it's this grand old movie palace. It's got 1,300 seats. It's got a balcony. It has a huge screen. It has the best sound system. Supposedly, it has the best sound system in the country. It's the THX Reference Theater. It's the other place besides the Chinese where they have all the big movie premieres. And so that's where we went. It's a much nicer neighborhood. Everything we needed. There was even a 24-hour deli. So for people on the night shift on the line, we could go there and go to the bathroom or get something to eat. There's this little alcove at the entrance to the theater that's over their not the marquee, but there's a big overhang where the marquee is attached to. And my wife and I would set up our inflatable camping mattress in there, and we had this cozy little nook all to ourselves.
So, are you still friends with any of the people you met during that time?
Yeah.
Or were there any long relationships formed?
Yeah. I met quite a few people from that line that I'm still in contact with, and one who's become one of my better friends. One guy, it's funny because the first guy in line who started, I was part of an internet group that was planning to camp out starting a month ahead of time. And then we found out that this 17-year-old kid had jumped ahead of us and actually started 6 weeks ahead of time. And so I went out and talked my way into his group, basically, so that I would be in the group at the head of the line. And he went on to become, to at least try to become, a film producer, actually. He was only 17 at the time. He was a kid with a lot of chutzpah, and he and I became good friends for a while. We've drifted apart since. And he has a couple of producing credits, but he doesn't seem to have done anything recently. But him and a couple of other friends who we're now, just in touch with on Facebook, but also one or two who went on to become really good friends and who I've worked with a bit.
So I'm so impressed that you did the 6 weeks in line for Episode 1. I don't know if I've really met anyone who's done that. And
well, you have to be a certain kind of crazy.
And it's that doesn't come from a place of judgment. It comes from a place of vast interest and curiosity, because that is look, I can't do a day camping, much less 6 weeks on the city streets.
Right. Well, I mean, in fairness, to be honest, I mean, I never,
behind it.
Until the last few days, I never did more than 24 hours a week.
Okay.
The kid who was at the head of the line was there basically sunrise to sunset every day of those 6 weeks. So, kudos to him.
Yeah.
But he was out of school. He did his GED because he was going to miss so much school to do this. But kudos to him. But I was there I did one 24-hour stretch per week until the last 4 days. And then my wife would come join me. Actually, we weren't married at this point. So my girlfriend would come join me after work because I was already freelancing at that point. And I was in the midst of writing a script and raising money for a film. So I had my cell phone, I had my laptop. I could work on the sidewalk as well as I could work at home or anywhere. And at some point, we even got a DSL line and a Wi-Fi router on the sidewalk. So I was actually able to function perfectly. It wasn't that much of a sacrifice, and it was fun. You got to hang out with friends all day. So so for the first 5 weeks, I did one 24-hour shift per week, and then the last 4 days, we were all there pretty much all the time.
So the 24-hour shift would be a consecutive 24 hours.
Yeah, I would get there in the morning and stay there until the following morning.
That's really cool. And did you guys
It was fun.
Did you play a lot of Star Wars games? Were you geeking out about Star Wars, or were you talking Star Trek?
Well, everything. I mean, it was a science fiction / movie community. So we talked about all that stuff.
And this is also before, I'm pretty sure Phantom Menace was before like online ticket sales. So like when you were in line, you were in line to get a ticket, not just to be in line.
Yeah. There was some chaos about that because the tickets went on sale a few weeks ahead of time. So during that time where we had to get our ticket and then get back online, there was some concern about that because people were showing up to buy tickets who hadn't waited online, and how it all worked out in the end. It was fine, but there was a little stress about that and making sure you had your ticket and then keeping your ticket for like 3 weeks, keeping it safe, making sure you didn't lose it.
Because
before the big night.
It wasn't a JPEG on your phone. It was
it
was a literal ticket.
It was a literal ticket.
Did you have the same intense desire to see episode 2 and 3 after seeing 1?
No. I mean, we did little campouts, but for progressively less time and with progressively less enthusiasm. But I mean, I still went to the first show for each of them, hoping against hope that they'd get better. I remember walking out of Attack of the Clones thinking, well, at least it wasn't as bad as the first one. And then over the coming weeks thinking, you know what? It was worse. There are things about episode 1 that I can find redeeming. There's very little about episode 2 that I can watch. I haven't. I completely avoid it now. And then there are things about episode 3 that I can find redeeming that make it the best of that trilogy.
Yeah.
But no, I can't bring myself to say any of them were good.
I've been thinking a lot about expectations lately and what expectations mean to myself. Because, for example, The Last Jedi, I had all these kind of expectations about it. And I don't know if I can say what they are now, but you read things online, rumors, this could happen, blah, blah, blah.
I thought since Force Awakens had been a remake of Star Wars, and that's a generational thing. I guess everyone else calls it A New Hope, but those of us who were there at the beginning still call it Star Wars.
Yep.
But since Force Awakens was basically a remake of Star Wars, I assumed Last Jedi would be Luke taking on the Yoda role and be basically a remake of Empire Strikes Back. And now I wish it had been.
Well, it's interesting to me that I think with Last Jedi, I had to see it and go, oh, this is what it is. And at first I didn't like it. And it took me a couple years maybe to come back around to kind of see what Rian Johnson was doing with it. And I have an argument that The Last Jedi is Empire Strikes Back in reverse. Let's see if I can form this argument on the fly. Empire Strikes Back starts on an ice planet. Last Jedi ends on a salt planet. Both of them essentially white, covered in snow. Luke is the hermit Jedi who's in hiding and wants to get away from the Force, whereas Yoda was the Jedi hermit in hiding who wanted to essentially find balance to the Force. Empire Strikes Back has a chase sequence in the middle of the film that goes to the end. That's the Empire chasing the Millennium Falcon to Bespin. And The Last Jedi has a chase from the beginning of the film that goes to near the end where they end up on Hoth. As opposed to going from Hoth to a chase to Bespin, this goes from a chase to what is the salt planet called? I can't even think of it now. And so I think there's a lot of things that are echoing there. But my point being is expectations play such a large role in your reaction to any bit of entertainment.
Yeah.
And with the internet now, with so much, I mean, everything is picked apart well before. Even now, we're talking about what is Rey going to be? Is Finn going to be in the movie? In this the Jedi Order, I don't know if it's called the Jedi Order, but the idea of Rey creating a Jedi Order and starting a new school.
Mark Hamill called. He wants his story back.
Yeah, exactly. It is a little bit of like, let's kind of fix what went wrong with the sequel trilogy. Not fix what went wrong, but adjust what it was. But in this world of fan expectations, what is the role of something like Star Wars? Is it to surprise us? Is it to placate us? Or is it something else? Am I even am I just a babbling idiot?
No, you're not. And it's a good question. I'm not going to get into a debate about Last Jedi because I think it was so horrific and so destructive to the legacy of Star Wars that I hardly even want to talk about it. And to Luke Skywalker in particular. It completely disrespected his entire journey, and it offends me personally. Not, now maybe if I had come to Star Wars through the prequels and Luke was not the singular figure that he is,
that's a good point.
For fans of my generation, maybe that would be less offensive. But what they did to him, for him to die squatting on a rock like he's taking a shit, was just the most disrespectful thing to the legacy of Star Wars that I can imagine. But the idea of expectations is a fascinating one from a filmmaking standpoint. And what, as filmmakers, what are our obligations to the audience? And in fact, that actually played into Sharknado too, because after the third movie, SYFY commissioned a market research study to find out what people liked about Sharknado. And the questions were worded in such a way that the answers were preordained. Like, do you like Sharknado because of the character development or to see crazy shark kills? Okay, well, I know how people are going to answer that, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't have character development. Yeah. Do you like the pop culture references in Sharknado, or would you prefer it be devoid of them? Okay, but that doesn't mean we have to put in 1 million pop culture references that have nothing to do with sharks or tornadoes and that are of such cultural recency that we don't know if the references will stand the test of time. In the first movie, I referenced Jaws and Jaws alone because it's a shark movie and you have to reference Jaws. In the second movie, I started referencing a few other things. There was a Star Wars line. There was more Jaws. The point was I only ever referenced classic movies that everybody would know. I'm not doing things from 2 years ago because we don't know if they're going to be relevant to people 10 years from now or even a year from now when the movie comes out. So the question of expectations and the filmmaker's responsibility to audience expectations is one that I've actually had to grapple with personally. I think entertainment does have a responsibility to surprise us, but they need to be good surprises. If you are doing something in an existing franchise, I think you do have a responsibility to not just redo what you've done before. You have a responsibility to surprise people, but you have to do it with respect to the pre-existing material. You've established the universe that the story exists in, and you have to remain true to that. You can't make something that contradicts what came before. When you make a Star Wars sequel, you should respect the characters that came before, even if you're going off in a new direction. I would love to see a new movie about Rey. She seems like a cool character, but
Yeah.
they should not be giving her the story that Luke Skywalker already was supposed to have fulfilled. Give her something new. Have her go off in a new direction. Don't have her start a new Jedi Order. That's what Luke did.
What are the top 3 elements that make Star Wars to you?
Lightsabers, Force, and fun.
That seems to be the 3, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And John Williams.
And John Williams. Yeah, it's I'm getting more used to it, but still having Star Wars content that doesn't have the themes feels
a little off.
Yeah, feels a little off.
Just a little, yeah.
Uh,
And it feels a little off until characters from the original show up, and then it feels a lot off.
Yes. Yeah. Well, to me, the scores are part of the character themselves.
Yeah.
It's almost like the musical number in a musical that defines the character.
Yeah.
But it's also part of the expansion of a franchise, like trying to open it up and let more people into the playground, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. And the going off in different directions is what they should do.
Yeah.
I think Andor was genius because it showed a side of that galaxy that we hadn't seen pretty much.
Yeah.
And it showed us the ordinary people who don't have the Force. What I think now would be fascinating, I don't know if they're going to do it, but if in the second season we can take these ordinary people and now start to introduce the Force, the Jedi, and how do they respond to it? That to me is very fertile ground for interesting drama.
Yeah.
So I definitely like the idea of Star Wars going off in new directions, as long as it's done with respect to what came before. And I don't think Rey starting a new Jedi Order is respectful. I think there's great stuff you could do with Rey trying to figure out a new direction. I don't think starting a new Jedi Order is the right way to go. We'll see. Maybe that's what they're telling us they're going to do, and it'll actually be something kind of different, and that would be great.
Yes. Yeah. I would just like to see her take on Star Wars.
Yeah. I always wanted to do a Star Wars. Now they've kind of done it with Mandalorian and Boba Fett. But this is my idea for a Star Wars movie that had nothing to do with the original trilogy. But this was what I was thinking of during the fallow years between Jedi and Phantom Menace. Was I wanted to do a movie about a lone Jedi, maybe somewhere in the Outer Rim, and it would be like an old Western. And the Jedi would go from planet to planet. He'd have a certain number of planets that he'd be responsible for, and he'd be like a marshal in the Old West.
Yeah.
Criminals would be held for trial when the Jedi came, and some settlers would be under attack by bad guys, and the Jedi would come defend them, and he would be one guy against this whole tribe of bad guys. And it would feel a little like certain parts of Firefly even.
Yep.
And so this old, sort of not old, but worn down, gritty, sort of weather-beaten Jedi he's not Luke Skywalker, he's not Obi-Wan Kenobi. He never served on the council. He never got anywhere near the council. He probably spent 3 days on Coruscant once his training was done. And he just goes from planet to planet and dispenses justice. I thought that would have been a cool Star Wars movie. Now I don't know if you could really tell that story because they've kind of gotten that feel out of the way with Mandalorian and Boba Fett and stuff.
Like a samurai series.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
We talked about Sharknado, and one of the things about Star Wars I find very interesting, especially now, is that yes, it's a fantasy, but it seems to be a world where other genres live, like the Western.
Mm-hmm.
the political thriller in Andor. Like if you look at some of the books, there's horror elements, or even the Clone Wars cartoon, there are horror elements to some episodes. Do you think there could be a Sharknado type movie in the Star Wars universe?
You mean, well, what do you mean by a Sharknado type movie? You mean the silliness of it? The
The
ridiculousness?
Yes, the ridiculousness of it, the kind
Sure.
of high camp,
Yeah,
said with a wink.
Yeah, I think Star Wars lends itself to a potential for a campy movie. I don't think you'd want to do a series. It's hard to maintain that over
Yeah.
the long haul. But I mean, hell, the first Star Wars movie has a touch of camp anyhow. So you could certainly do a Sharknado-esque Star Wars movie and have a lot of fun with it, and just have it be silly and over the top and campy. I mean, there's so much, there's so much goofy stuff you could do with the Force. If you had a Jedi who was just completely undisciplined, but good, not evil, but just completely undisciplined, it would be hilarious. Absolutely.
Larry the Lazy Jedi. I'm starting a comic book.
I mean, every time I'm in line to check out at the supermarket, I wish I had the Force to grab something, from another aisle that I forgot, and it could just come flying into my hands without me having to get out of line. So sure, there'd be a lot of fun stuff. I mean, they sort of toyed with that. I don't know if it was in episode 2 or 3, but Anakin is doing something silly with the Force.
Yeah.
And it was just a tiny little moment. You could absolutely do a whole movie like that.
There was in episode 2, he's kind of using the Force a little bit to seduce, is it Padme?
Yeah.
Because he like feeds her like a strawberry using the Force.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of fun stuff you could do. Yeah. I mean, somebody put me in touch with Lucasfilm. I'll give them a Sharknado Star Wars. No problem.
And finally, this is a question I ask all my guests, is you go to Skywalker Ranch, and there at the gates, George Lucas greets you. What do you say to him?
Well, that's a twist on a classic question.
Right? I'm so glad you laughed at that, because a friend of mine's like, don't ask that question. I'm like, no, I have to ask it, and I have to ask it like this.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one, because the answer to that question is so different from what it would have been, 20, 30 years ago, before the prequels came out, to then during the prequel era, to then the Disney era. I mean, there's almost different things you want to talk to him about. Before the prequels, I don't know that I could have even formed a coherent sentence in his presence. I mean, he loomed so large.
Yeah.
And then after the prequels, I don't know that I even wanted to talk to him, because I was just I was like, George, what the fuck happened? And then now I feel sort of bad for him that I imagine him sitting up there in Skywalker Ranch and hearing about, the latest Star Wars thing and going, like, that's not what I wanted at all. And apparently he thought, I mean, he was under the impression when he sold the company that they were going to use his ideas for the next trilogy. And he'd always had at least a general outline of how it was supposed to go. And then as soon as the ink was dry on the contracts, they tore up his scripts and threw them out, and it was like, no, we're going to do this. So now I sort of feel bad for him. God, I don't know what I would say to him, except, hey man, can you finance a movie? Can I come work for you? I mean, I've always wanted to do the sound work for one of my films at Skywalker. I think that would be cool.
Yeah. Get someone like Ben Burt.
Yeah, wouldn't that be amazing?
Well, Thunder, thank you so much for joining me.
We don't get to talk about Star Wars anymore?
Oh, we can still talk about it.
Now I have to go back to my real world. Oh, man.
Yeah.
Damn.
But, well, this is like Star Wars in itself. It's a break from reality, but soon you have to go out. And at least you didn't camp out for 6 weeks before the podcast.
That's right. That's right. So that's something. But the podcast hasn't been as disappointing as episode 1. I've enjoyed it.
Good. I'm glad I was able to surprise you and subvert your expectations
Yes.
of what this was going to be.
Yes. Thank you.
I never know how to end this.
May the force be with you.
The force will be with you always.
Always. I used to have that on my answering machine. Back when we had answering machines,
Answering
I actually
machines.
used tape cassettes and stuff. I actually did this whole mix thing where I did Darth Vader's voice, and it is, you have reached, such and such a number. It is a dark time for your call. The local inhabitants are far, far away seeking fortune and glory. I alone can deliver your message. Please tell me your name, number, and the time of your call, and remember. And then I spliced in Obi-Wan's "The Force will be with you always."
So that's what Star Wars means to Thunder Levin. Did you camp out in line for any of the prequel or sequel trilogy movies? Did you have a change of heart when you saw your first Star Wars movie? Would you have wanted to see that Sharknado the 4th Awakens teaser trailer? Let us know and get in on the conversation on Twitter or Instagram at Star Wars Mean to You. That's at Star Wars Mean, the number 2 in the letter U. Next week, I welcome Kelly Knox, the author of such Star Wars books as Be More Obi-Wan and Star Wars Every Day. Also on Twitter, she comes up with some of the best puns/jokes in the galaxy. So hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. If you're liking the show, please give a 5-star rating and review. And remember, the Force will be with you, always. Hi, this is Dave, and before we get to the show, I wanted to ask you a favor. One of our goals this year is to grow the show so that What Does Star Wars Mean to You reaches more listeners, and that's where we're asking you for help. And it's really easy. Wherever you listen to us, please hit that subscribe button. If you're liking the show, give us a 5-star rating and review on the platform you listen to us. We make a lot of fun of the algorithm and the smash that button thing, but it really does help us get noticed by new fans. And if you want to join in on the conversation, find us on social at Star Wars Mean to You. That's Star Wars Mean, the number 2 in the letter U. Now, let's chat some Star Wars.